The scenes of death and destruction from Ukraine in recent days have amplified calls to hold Russia accountable for its actions there. A warning, we're going to show you some of those scenes, and they're graphic. The images from Bucha shocked the world: a mass grave behind a church and dead scattered around the town's streets. Then on Friday, in the eastern city of Kramatorsk, a train station packed with people trying to escape to safety that was hit by a Russian missile strike. At last count, at least 50 were killed and around 100 were wounded. One of the big questions surrounding all this is, should Vladimir Putin himself be prosecuted for war crimes? Could he be? The former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown has proposed a way to make this happen. He joins me now from Scotland. Gordon Brown, explain why this idea of yours would make a difference. After all, we're not going to arrest Vladimir Putin anytime soon.
What we're seeing now is torture, rape, mutilation, murder, not as byproducts of war, but as a policy of war being conducted by Putin. And we've already found this morning far more evidence in other villages just outside Kiev of these kinds of crimes. So we've got to, first of all, say that Putin cannot act with impunity. Secondly, we've got to say that those people in his inner circle are complicit and they could be charged with crimes of conspiracy. And thirdly, we've got to give the Ukrainian people the sense that we will continue to monitor and report and investigate and eventually prosecute these crimes. They need the assurance that the eyes of the whole world are upon Ukraine. And I believe that we should set up a special tribunal in this case to charge Putin with the crime of aggression. Clearly, he has invaded the country, and clearly he continues this process of invasion, even if he's now focused on the east rather than on Kiev. And I believe a special tribunal could be created very quickly. It's at the request of Ukraine, whom I've talked to about this. Many other countries should support their efforts to get this tribunal. It should probably be set up in The Hague alongside the International Criminal Court, which would over time investigate war crimes and crimes against humanity. But this crime of aggression is the initial crime. It's the supreme crime. It's what was, of course, prosecuted after 1942, when we decided that there would be what became the Nuremberg trials. And it's perfectly within our power to agree that we should set up this tribunal now.
The big difference between Nuremberg and now, Gordon Brown, is that people say you're going to have to cut a deal with Putin. The only way out of this crisis is some kind of negotiated settlement. Obviously, in World War II, the goals were unconditional surrender, total destruction of the Nazi regime and the Imperial Japanese regime. Given that you're going to have to deal with Putin, most likely, does it make sense to do this?
That would be for a decision of the Ukraine people, what sort of deal that they might in the end reach as an agreement with the Russians. But we've got to understand the only thing that Putin understands. I've worked with him, I've dealt with him, I've negotiated with him. The only thing he understands is strength. If you show any sign of weakness, either disunity or a willingness to compromise on principles, then he will use that as a sign that he can go further. So we've got to display strength, and strength is saying you cannot act with impunity. These are war crimes, probably crimes against humanity. They may extend over time to genocide, a form of ethnic cleansing. We do not yet know about that. But what we do know is that there's been a crime of aggression. That was the initial crime in 1942. Now, the question then is, how do you get to Putin and his inner circle to punish them? You make it clear that, of course, the crime of aggression is in Russian law, it's in Ukraine law. You make it clear that if he left the country, he would be arrested. You make it clear to his inner circle that if they stick with Putin, then they are liable to be arrested too. But what you've got to do is set up a process, probably in The Hague, as I say, working alongside the International Criminal Court. But we will publish this week what is, if you like, a list of the crimes of aggression, which makes it clear that there is a prima facie case for a prosecution against Putin and his inner circle.
It sounds like you're saying Putin is essentially persona non grata, should be kind of become an international pariah. In that circumstance, for example, should Russia's membership in the G20 be suspended in some way. This is what Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, has raised. You were instrumental in making the G20 important after the global financial crisis. Should Russia be out?
Well, of course, Russia has been thrown out of the G7, which for a brief period of time became the G8. And I think that was the right decision to take. Suspension is different from expulsion. And of course, in circumstances where you cannot work with a country, Russia is basically on the sidelines in the G20 at the moment. It's not really participating. I don't think Putin has attended a meeting recently, or any of his ministers in person. I think that's a decision the G20 can make when it meets next. But the key thing is to understand that the United Nations Security Council... I would recommend suspension, but I would hope that it would not lead in the end to expulsion. But that depends. Putin's regime is a pariah state. As long as Putin is leader of Russia, in my view, it will remain a pariah state. It is leading to the decoupling of Russia from Europe and the decoupling of Russia from the West. We don't yet know what final attitude China will take to this. It is more ambivalent, perhaps, than what people thought at the outset of this crisis. What I feel we're moving towards, unless we take action, is one world and two systems, a future of one world, two systems. What I think the West has got to do, that's Europe and America, is offer people a global Marshall Plan, which is not simply about military action to contain Russia and potentially in future to contain China, but economic and political action that can bring those parts of the world together, whether it's through free trade or whether it's through subventions to make sure that people can enjoy prosperity. We've got to show that there is a superiority in the way that our economic prosperity is developed in the countries of Europe and America.
You dealt with Putin when he had essentially ordered the poisoning and the killing of a Russian defector. You know, when he, in your view, when he faces these setbacks, when he feels like Plan A is not working, what is most likely? What do you imagine Putin's plan is now in Ukraine?
Putin is opportunist. You know what his final objectives are, but he's opportunist. When Litvinenko was assassinated in London, we knew that he was behind it. We also knew that he was planning other assassinations on British soil. And the only way we prevented these until the attempt in Salisbury 10 years later was massive security on our side, but the threat to Russia about the action we would be taking if there were further attempts at assassination on our soil. In other words, the only thing he understands is threats, the only thing he understands is strength, and we've got to show that this united strength that has started this approach to dealing with this crisis continues, and that will mean, I'm afraid to say, for Germany and others, they will have to do oil and gas sanctions. They will have to cover all the banks and not just some of the banks, and it would be ridiculous if we ended up paying the cost of Putin's war by allowing the continuation of payments from the West to Russia for oil and gas over a very considerable period of time.
Gordon Brown, always good to have you on, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.